This is session number 4, titled Optimization in Engineering. I figured out that while scheduling the program, I made a terrible mistake and placed this session right after Aziz Hoca's talk. But it was too late to change it, and I'm only humbled to be up on this stage with where Aziz Hoca was standing a few minutes ago, and with all the distinguished speakers on the podium. Frankly speaking, I'm certainly not qualified to be here on the stage, but I am tasked with this duty, and I will follow that task. This is engineering session, and we have all engineer-trained speakers in the session. So the drill is going to be as follows. I will first talk about 10 minutes just to set the stage for my speakers. I will talk about my own research, 2 different problems that I am dealing with, and then each speaker will take about 23 minutes or so to deliver their talks. And at the very end, we will have about 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A time, hopefully, if we can have. So with that said, I'll go ahead and scroll over my slides. As I mentioned, I want to talk about 2 different problems that I am dealing with. One is a very practical problem in healthcare. You didn't hear it wrong. As an engineer, I am working in healthcare problems. But my medical colleagues in the audience may laugh in some of my slides because the level of medicine in my slides are elementary level. Those are intended only for the non-medical audience. And the problem that I have worked on is in liver transplantation. And I'm posing that question up on the slide. Are you ready to accept the next liver offer? And when making that decision, how much of the waiting list information would you like to have? So that's a very practical problem that I will try to talk about. And then I will go more into some methodological work that I do in my own field, operations research, to try to tackle a very hard problem that is commonly known as multi-stage stochastic integer programs, and I will investigate if we can use grid computing to tackle these problems. So on this slide, I've just put some numbers for non-medical audience again to get an idea about the organ transplant system in the US. The total numbers have been increasing over years, and as you can see, and we have organs other than kidney that are transplantable. So whenever I start talking about organ transplantation to non-medical community, everybody just thinks about kidneys. There are other organs, including liver and 4 more solid organs as far as I know. This talk will be about liver transplantation. I also posted total numbers on the very right column just to give you the total experience we have gained over the last 30 years in terms of organ transplantation. It looks like we have completed over 650,000 organ transplants. That's a stunningly big number in terms of gaining experience. So I believe we know a lot about the clinical aspects of organ transplantation. The state of knowledge in medicine is pretty advanced, and that's not what I'm going to touch upon. This is my humble attempt about what livers are. For an engineer who didn't take any biology classes after high school, this is pretty advanced for me. Okay, so livers are extremely important. They do a lot of functions, and as far as I know, it is it is the organ that does so many multi-functions. And if you happen to have, God forbid, liver failure, the only solution to that is transplantation. And transplantation comes in the form of either deceased donors or living donors. Our focus will be primarily on deceased donor transplantation. So yesterday you heard Tayfun Sönmez talk about kidney exchanges. That was entirely living donor transplant, living donor kidney transplantation. Now, the graphic to the bottom right is meant to give you the good news that transplantation is indeed very effective for livers. 10-year survival rates you will see is exceeding 60%, which is a good number. This is a slide that is meant to give you some idea about the current status of organ transplant system in the US. These are all liver numbers. The very top line is the total number of individuals waiting in the waiting list at any moment in time. Right now, if you go to the liver transplant waiting list, you will see about 16,000 individuals demanding a liver transplant. The next line is the number of livers that we are harvesting throughout the year. It's not any moment anymore. It's throughout the year. And the line below is the actual transplants that we are completing. So the gap between those two lines is inefficiencies in the system. We are basically trashing those hard to recruit organs. So let me give you a brief highlight about how the system works in the US. There is an organization called UNOS, United Network for Organ Sharing. They are the boss. They manage everything through dividing the country into regions. There are 11 regions in the country, and each of these regions are further subdivided into little service areas. They are called OPO areas or donation service areas. And I'm just giving you a brief highlight about the algorithm. It's not this simple, but the main elements are here. When a liver is donated, the central system executes a prioritization algorithm that does the following. Each patient is categorized with respect to his or her geography. They are labeled either as local patients, regional patients, or national patients. So the definition of local is as follows. Each organ is harvested from one of those little regions that I mentioned. If the patient happens to register to the system from the same geographic area of the harvester, then he or she is labeled as a local patient. If he is not in the same local area but in the same region, he's a regional, otherwise he or she is a national patient. In terms of health, patients are grouped into two, status 1 patients and MELT patients. The definition of status 1 is scary. When I read it, I really got scared. It is those individuals that have a life expectancy of less than a week without a transplant. So it's a very scary status, but fortunately we don't have more than a dozen in that 16,000 list that is in this group. MELT is a statistical measure. It stands for MELT score, model for end-stage liver disease. It's a regression equation that measures how sick you are. And the higher the number, the more sick you are perceived. And the algorithm works as follows. The OPO harvests the organ. It first looks for status 1 patients in the OPO. If cannot find anyone, then moves to the region for status 1 patients. If nobody is there, come back to the OPO area and looks for MELT patients that have a score of at least 15. MELT scores, by the way, go up to 40. These are all integer numbers. And the algorithm continues in this manner as my arrows indicate there. If there is any tie in any one of the boxes, then blood type compatibility will play a role to break the ties, and there are further tie-breaking rules. Now, The question that I am interested in is on the title of the slide. As a liver patient waiting on the waiting list, when the central manager sends me an organ offer, should I accept it or not? The immediate reaction to this question is, I'm dying, and I know organs are scarce. Why would I reject it? Before answering the why part, let me give you some numbers from Yunus. When I saw the 19% acceptance rate of offers, I mean, that meant something. So the thought process of why would I ever reject is, it needs to be rethought again and again, because rejections are not a rare event. It does happen very, very often. Now, why are organs declined? There could be many, many reasons for that, but my layman explanation of that is in italics over here. If the quality of the current liver is not as high as I desire it to be, and for whatever reason I expect a better quality offer in the near future, I will pass on this one and wait for the new one. Now, the assessment of the likelihood of new offers is entirely dependent on the composition of the waiting list. Because the ones that I am passing on are forwarded to the other individuals in the waiting list, or if I have already accepted, then I am out of the list. So, but the question is, how useful? Is it going to make a huge impact in my life expectancy to know this waiting list information? That's the question I'm interested in. So I will study this problem in a very stylistic, but at the same time still sophisticated mathematical structure to answer this question. I will not bore you with any details. I will just tell you that as far as I can tell, the current state of knowledge falls short on studying the ideal environment. By ideal environment, I mean multiple players are on the waiting list. They are making strategic decisions because their decisions affect each other. It's not the case that there is nothing known about the waiting list. Some things are known. Is it worth it to gain extra knowledge of the waiting list? That's the thing. That's the question. So MI should be compared to MB. There is also asymmetric information issues across the decision makers in this environment. And it's a difficult problem. At least I don't know how to tackle that. That's why I'm isolating myself to an individual patient and investigating what happens if this patient uses the waiting list information. Is he going to make any different decisions? And how much of an impact is it going to make in the patient's life expectancy? Without any model details, let me summarize some of the results for 200 patients that we have looked at. They are categorized in terms of their disease categories. By the way, I know nothing about these diseases. I'm working with liver physicians and surgeons from the University of Pittsburgh's Medical Center. They tell me everything on the medical side. I just do the math and validate my findings, whether or not they are sensible. If they are not, then they punish me to go and work further on those models and to correct whatever is wrong. It turns out that if the individual completely ignores the waiting list, as opposed to using the waiting list perfectly, so two idealized environments, which doesn't exist in reality, then he or she will be doing really terrible. Her life, she's going to lose on average about 5% of her life expectancy. On the other hand, even though I'm not going to show you details, if she uses what's available out there, there is no further reason to claim perfect waiting list information. That's the main message I would like to give. The second problem I will wrap up in 2 minutes. The second problem is a more methodological problem. It's a modeling framework for sequential decision-making problems under uncertainty. Many of you have faced the following situation. You need to make an optimal decision for whatever, let's say for an investment scenario. But you are also taking into consideration what might happen in the future. So in node number 0 over there, you're doing some initial decisions, and then uncertainty reveals itself. Some of the uncertainties are realized, and you have an option to pay back recourse actions. So you can take recourse actions. So the nodes are telling you recourse action points. There are numerous applications of these in every field you can think of: energy, finance, social networks, you name it. But the trouble with this modeling framework is the tree that you have seen a slide ago is going to be enormous. It's going to be huge. It is practically impossible to solve them on a single CPU. Plus, when you add integer decision variables into your decision making, it makes life even more miserable. So my goal in this research is the following. If you cannot eat the entire meal in one sitting, eat it in little chunks. Okay? I am somehow intelligently dividing the meal into little pieces, into little eatable pieces. And the engineering aspect of this is whatever you're doing in the little pieces, does it guarantee anything for the original problem? So it involves some technical details about the monotonicity of everything you do. And by the way, when I divide things in these little pieces, then I'm going to feed them into a grid computing environment so that I can use thousands of CPUs at the same time and shorten my solution times. With that, I would like to conclude my own presentation.